Chinese martial arts have existed since the 6th century AD, and in that time they've been associated with many myths and legends. But an idea which has persisted all the way to the modern day is the idea of true kung fu. Well, today I'm here to ask, is such a thing real? And if there is such a thing as true kung fu, where is it and how do we find it? But before we go too far, first we need to ask the question, what is Kung Fu? After all, how are we to discuss something and we can't define it? Well, the term Kung Fu, or Gung Fu, didn't really exist associated with martial arts until the 70s. Before then, Chinese martial arts was simply known as that, Chinese martial arts, or Chinese boxing, or as the style that you were referring to, such as 7-star praying mantis, tiger style, etc. It wasn't until the 1970s with Bruce Lee that the term began to be associated with Chinese martial arts, with the term bitter work referring to, as you might imagine, hard work, or doing something for so long and putting such effort and skill into it that you gain a level of mastery of it. People would say that you have Kung Fu in cookery, for example, or in art, or martial arts. It fits really well with the philosophy of Chinese martial arts, and so the name just stuck. Plus, when Bruce Lee names something, you kind of have to stick with it. And so if Chinese martial arts, or Kung Fu, is referring to hard work, then where does the idea of true Kung Fu come from? Or this sort of mythical idea of there being a true form of Chinese martial arts? Well, first let's take a look at the influence that media has had on martial arts. First, there is wuxia, a style of filmmaking which takes a look at more mythical characters, more characters of myth and legend within Chinese culture. And so, these films often display a lot of, say, high-flying acrobatics, a lot of high kicks, a lot of gravity-defying feats. And martial arts, or kung fu, have been associated for a long time with wuxia. And of course a lot of this would also bear in mind the idea of magical power, attaining magical power through that, again, hard work, and through bitter work. A prominent example, for example, is the book series of Journey to the West, in which varieties of characters attain magical power or attain martial prowess through years of hard work and dedication, such as the most famous character, Sun Wukong, who after years of training with a Taoist sage, attains many powers, including powers of transformation, levitation via riding of a cloud, being able to shrink or grow, as well as duplication magic. And with him being known for carrying one of the most famous weapons of Chinese martial arts, and most especially Shaolin with his staff, it makes more sense why the idea of magical power could be associated with Chinese martial arts. Also, let us be honest, with a variety of demonstrations or techniques showcased by Shaolin monks, it makes a lot of sense why people would think that they had magical power. If you saw someone being struck with a heavy iron pillar, or being able to jump into the air and then crash down onto the ground onto a hard concrete floor and be perfectly fine, you would think that they would have attained some level of greater magical power. Another idea which comes up a lot is the idea of pressure points. The idea of being able to strike multiple specific areas of the body to create an immediate reaction. While in reality this sort of thing is, well, fictional, it does carry with it a lot of weight in terms of the idea of mystical power. And looking at the physique of a lot of Shaolin monks, if you saw a Shaolin monk punch someone and suddenly be able to send them far out across the room or do a heavy amount of damage, you would think that some sort of magical power was involved, especially if you were particularly superstitious, or especially if you were not very well versed in the training methods of Shaolin. And over time, as these feats would spread, it would make sense why magic would come into it as a way to explain how these seemingly tiny Shaolin monks could do such things, especially as the stories of the Shaolin monks journeyed out of China and over to the West. But of course that's all the physical, but what about the spiritual? Because as we've already discussed, the feats of the characters within Journey to the West, or in wuxia, they are often presented by characters who not only attain power through physical labour, or through physical training, but also through spiritual training, a journey towards enlightenment. That's the very point of Journey to the West after all. So we have to also underline the spiritual influence of this idea of true kung fu. Because when the Shaolin Temple first became about martial arts, it was a way to attain greater ability to practice their spiritual beliefs. It was a way to better meditate for longer periods of time and to be healthier for spiritual practice. In fact, in many regions where they practice form work, they will refer to it not as form work but as sutras or as prayers. It is a spiritual experience as much as it is a physical one. And so if martial skill becomes a journey towards enlightenment or a journey towards spiritual influence, then the more spiritual ideas could easily become ingratiated into the physical. But then if we consider that the Chinese culture also includes medicine in with their spiritual practice, how there'll be things such as Qigong or Tai Chi, which involve a series of breathing exercises or a series of stretching movements which are meant to affect the energy of the inner body for the process of healing, or things like acupuncture, which are again supposed to hit specific pressure points. Then you see how the spiritual influence could easily influence the physical in order to greater magnify this idea of a magical influence. All of that has certainly underlined the idea of how Kung Fu or Chinese martial arts can be associated with magic or with mystical influence. But how does that then underline the idea between Kung Fu and true Kung Fu? This idea, and what I mean by true Kung Fu is this idea of going up into the mountains, coming across an old master or an aging master, and learning mystical, secret powers from them. Where does that idea come from? Well, I think one answer is again the media. This idea of finding a master all the way up in the mountains and learning secret techniques from him. That idea has certainly been perpetrated in films, but the other idea which I think could have caused this idea of true Kung Fu is there's two schools of thought when it comes to Chinese martial arts. There's the pre-Mao school of thought and the post-Mao school of thought. And let me explain what both of those are. You see, what happened was that after World War II, when the Communist Revolution happened in China, Mao certainly liked martial arts. He liked Chinese martial arts. He liked to see it, but even though he liked it, that doesn't mean that he could let it by. Because Chinese martial arts, any martial arts really, they often have this hierarchy within the schools. This idea of the master and the student, and then above the master, you'll have the masters here, then you'll have the grand master, or the high masters, whatever you want to call them. And if there's that particular hierarchy, and you have these students which are loyal to the grand masters, or to the high masters, then they're not loyal to the state. And so what do you do with that? If someone's not loyal to you, they're loyal to a master. Someone who probably has certain moral values which probably will go against what you're doing. Well, you need to get this under control. How do you do that? By standardizing, of course. And so that began the movement towards wushu. And so those that were in China that wanted to practice Chinese martial arts began to practice them in a more standardized fashion, or a fashion which relied more so on form work, more so on performance, more so on demonstration. It still meant that people could be healthy, which is a good thing because you want healthy people to fight for your state. It also marked pride, especially in later years, pride for something that was traditional, a traditional part of the Chinese culture. And it's something that espoused good moral values. And so if you have something which does all those things, and you have it at a level of control where it won't interrupt the state's agenda, well then, what do you have to worry about? The rogue element. You see, there were masters who did not appreciate what they were doing, and so left China and went to other places. They went to Taiwan, or went to India, or went to Australia, or went to wherever. And these masters, they practiced the pre-Mao Chinese martial arts. This true Chinese martial arts. Not Kung Fu, Chinese martial arts. And that's how a lot of these styles have allowed to remain. These more effective ideas, things like Chin-Na, but these are in very rare places, and the unfortunate part is that if a master, an older master, who knows all these secrets, dies before passing on that knowledge, then that of course means that the knowledge dies with them. And so you see how this sort of idea begins, this idea of true Kung Fu, because if there is something which is against an agenda of the state, it survives over here, but in remnants, in small patches, in small clusters. But it still is able to live. Maybe not for very long, then there is a chance of finding it. And after all, Chinese martial arts have existed since the 6th century AD. And so you can imagine how much information we have both gained in that time and lost in that time. Through again this process of the knowledge not being able to be passed on or being destroyed. Because the Shaolin Temple has in that time been raided and destroyed several times, so it only makes sense. But do I think that such a thing as true Kung Fu does exist? Yes and no. Yes, in terms of there is a true way to practice Chinese martial arts, and no in that it's probably not in the way you're thinking. Is there going to be such a thing as mystical power? Or mystical what have you? I agree with the idea of spiritual influence in Chinese martial arts. It is quite powerful to think about how martial skill, especially whether cultivated or if you have a natural talent at it, is a gift from God. That is a powerful idea. It's a very empowering notion. And I don't know about other masters of any sort of martial art, but I intend to use my martial skill for the purposes of good, for the purposes of serving the Lord. And so in that respect, if you're practicing it with that in mind, you could be moving towards true Kung Fu. But what about the other idea, the idea of pre-Mao Kung Fu? Well, the idea of pre-Mao Kung Fu, or true Kung Fu. Well, what was the original purpose of Kung Fu? The original purpose was, again, for spiritual enlightenment, but it was also towards the furtherance of knowledge, or the sharing of knowledge. As Shaolin masters or disciples of the Shaolin Temple would go out to other temples or to other places to gain new knowledge, to spread knowledge. And so in that respect, if you yourself go out into the world humbly trying to learn more or to spread knowledge, then that is going more so towards the original concept of Kung Fu. And especially if you are willing to challenge yourself, if you are willing to take what you already know in Chinese martial arts or in any martial art, and you are willing to test it, if you are willing to challenge it, if you are willing to fail and come back stronger, then that is moving towards what true Kung Fu is. It's about putting in that hard work and be willing to grow naturally, rather than taking a shortcut of some easy mystical power that you just get through an elaborate power-up sequence or through a mystical scroll. That's not true Kung Fu. True Kung Fu is through bitter work, it's through hard work, it's through skill, it's through challenge. As the idea of Shaolin, it wasn't so much a system. It's not a linear system. It is a philosophy, a mindset, a continual growth of wiping away the old. As the idea of Shaolin, it wasn't so much a system. It's not a linear system, it is a philosophy, a mindset, a continual growth of wiping away the old, maintaining what works, but improving upon it at the same time.
There is no secret ingredient.
Okay, so in a practical sense, how do you move towards true Kung Fu? Well, as we've already said, hard work, discipline, patience, but more important than that, practicality. Ironically, MMA, modern MMA, is moving towards more of an idea of true Kung Fu than is actual Kung Fu. Because it's about learning and growing and changing and sharing knowledge. It just doesn't have that spiritual side, ironically enough. If it included the spiritual part of it, and I'm sure people do in isolated cases, individual people probably look to their faith for guidance in terms of their practice. But doing things such as sparring, such as pins, such as locks, learning those things, or doing something such as grappling, which is something that Chinese martial arts, to my knowledge, doesn't really do all that much. Learning those things, that's moving towards true Kung Fu. We'll take that knowledge of learning and improving and take it out into the world. So I say to you all, keep growing, keep working, and until next time, peace be with you.